The marble lobby of the prestigious Richardson and Wilson Law Firm fell into an eerie silence as those words echoed off the crystal chandeliers. 3 security guards moved with practiced precision, surrounding the black woman in the $4.500 Ann Taylor suit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Their handcuffs caught the light from the opulent fixtures above, creating an almost surreal contrast between luxury and humiliation. Andrea Washington adjusted her platinum cufflinks and glanced at her Audemars Piguet watch. 4:12 p.m. 18 minutes until the most important meeting of her life, a $1.2 billion class action lawsuit against Westfield Industries that had taken 3 years to build. 18 minutes until everything she'd worked for would either succeed or crumble into dust. The blonde receptionist, Rebecca Martinez, stood behind the marble counter with theatrical authority. Her voice carried across the grand lobby like a prosecutor delivering a verdict. "We maintain certain standards here at Richardson and Wilson. We've had issues with individuals trying to use facilities they haven't paid for." Business professionals pulled out their phones instinctively. A young Asian woman at the lobby cafe, Jessica Kim, discreetly started her TikTok live stream. Her 89,000 followers were always hungry for content, and this looked like it was about to become something explosive. The security guards approached with the kind of measured authority that suggested they'd done this before. Andrea remained perfectly still, her Italian leather briefcase at her side, her expression calm despite the chaos erupting around her. She'd chosen this law firm specifically for this moment. She'd arrived at this exact time for a reason. None of this was an accident. But what Andrea Washington did next didn't just change her life. It changed an entire industry forever. To understand the magnitude of what happened that day, you need to understand the woman at the center of it all. Andrea Washington wasn't born into wealth. Her story began in the struggling neighborhoods of Detroit, where her mother, Sandra Washington, worked 3 jobs just to keep their small apartment. Sandra cleaned office buildings at night, stocked shelves at a grocery store during the day, and took in sewing on weekends. Andrea would often wake up at 3 a.m. to find her mother hunched over her old Singer sewing machine, mending clothes for neighbors to earn an extra $20 here and there. The soft whirring of that machine became the soundtrack of her childhood. "Daughter," Sandra would tell her during those early morning hours when she thought she was asleep, "the world's gonna try to tell you what you can't do because of how you look, but I'm telling you what you can do because of who you are inside." Those words would echo in Andrea's mind years later as she stood in that law firm lobby facing discrimination in a $4.500 suit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Andrea's academic brilliance became apparent early. While other kids her age were playing video games, she was devouring books on law, constitutional rights, and civil liberties. The full scholarship to Harvard Law School was a dream come true, but it came with challenges Andrea hadn't anticipated. She was one of only 12 black students in her incoming class of 200. The culture shock was immediate and jarring. Cultural fit became a phrase she'd hear repeatedly during her first year. Not in her grades. She consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class. But in study groups, networking events, and social gatherings, Andrea often felt like she was performing a character rather than being herself. The breaking point came during her second year. Andrea had applied for a prestigious internship at Covington and Burling. Her academic credentials were impeccable. Her interview had gone exceptionally well. She'd connected with the hiring partner over their shared love of jazz music, and had been told she was exactly the kind of fresh thinking the firm needed. 2 weeks later, she received the rejection letter. The reason given was cultural fit concerns. When she inquired further, she was told her communication style and approach to team dynamics weren't aligned with the firm's values. That night, Andrea called her mother. Through tears of frustration and disappointment, she told her she was considering dropping out. "Maybe they're right, Mom. Maybe I don't fit in this world." Sandra Washington was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Baby, let me tell you something. Your great-grandfather was told he couldn't read because black folks didn't have the brains for it. He learned anyway and became a teacher. Your grandfather was told he couldn't own property because banks didn't trust his kind. He saved every penny and bought 3 buildings. I was told I couldn't provide for you because single mothers don't raise successful children. Look where you are right now." She paused, and Andrea could hear the emotion in her voice. "Don't you dare let them convince you that their comfort is more important than your dreams. You earn your place at that table, and then you make sure there's room for others who look like you." That conversation changed everything. Instead of dropping out, Andrea doubled down. She graduated summa cum laude and delivered the commencement address to her class. But even with her Harvard Law degree and outstanding academic record, Andrea faced rejection after rejection in the job market. 27 interviews, 19 final rounds, and 17 cultural fit rejections. It was Professor James Chen, her favorite Harvard professor and eventual mentor, who gave Andrea the advice that would shape her entire career approach. "Success is the best revenge, Andrea," Professor Chen said during their final meeting before graduation, "but dignity is non-negotiable. Whatever you build, make sure it's built on a foundation of respect for every human being who walks through your doors." Those words would prove prophetic 15 years later. With $8,000 in savings and an unshakable belief in her vision, Andrea started Washington Legal Advocates from a cramped studio apartment in Boston. Her first office was a corner desk next to her kitchen table, where she'd spend 18-hour days researching cases and cold-calling potential clients. The early years were brutal. Andrea survived on ramen noodles and determination, often choosing between paying for legal research subscriptions or buying groceries. Her first major success came with a disability discrimination case against a mid-sized retail chain. She won a $450,000 settlement for her client, a wheelchair user who had been repeatedly denied reasonable accommodations. The victory caught the attention of several disability rights organizations, who began referring cases to her. Within 2 years, Andrea had built a reputation as a formidable advocate for the underrepresented. She hired her first associate, moved into a small office space, and began to specialize in discrimination cases. But Andrea's success wasn't just about winning cases. From the very beginning, she was intentional about creating opportunities for others who looked like her. Every lawyer she hired had to meet what she called the integrity standard: diverse legal perspectives, ethical practice, and commitment to justice for all clients, regardless of their background. By her 5th year in practice, Washington Legal Advocates had grown to a team of 8 attorneys handling civil rights cases across 3 states. It was during this period that Andrea met Carlos Rodriguez, a brilliant constitutional law scholar who was consulting on one of her class action lawsuits. Carlos had immigrated from Mexico with his family when he was 12, speaking no English but carrying big dreams. Their first meeting was supposed to be a standard legal consultation. It ended up being a 4-hour conversation about everything from constitutional interpretation to social justice to their shared love of classical music. Andrea knew within that first conversation that Carlos was someone special. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony in Detroit, with Sandra Washington beaming as she watched her daughter marry the man who had become like a son to her. When their daughter Maya was born, Andrea's motivation shifted into an entirely new gear. Holding her newborn daughter in her arms, she made a promise that would drive every decision she made for the next 16 years. "Baby girl, I'm going to make sure the world you grow up in is better than the one I did." By Maya's 5th birthday, Washington Legal Advocates had grown into a nationally recognized civil rights firm with offices in Boston, Chicago, and Atlanta. Andrea had been featured in the American Bar Association Journal twice and was regularly invited to speak at conferences about inclusive legal practices. But success brought new challenges and unwanted attention. As Maya grew older, Andrea became increasingly aware of the world she would inherit. Despite her success and wealth, she couldn't shield her daughter from every instance of prejudice or discrimination. The painful realization that money and status weren't enough to protect her daughter from racism became a driving force in her decision to expand into corporate law. "I can't control every interaction she'll have," Andrea explained to Carlos, "but I can control some of them. If I represent the corporations, the institutions, the places where power resides, I can make sure they're places where everyone feels welcome." The incident that would ultimately lead to Andrea's test at Richardson and Wilson happened on a Tuesday evening in October. Maya, now 16 and everything Andrea and Carlos had hoped she would become, intelligent, confident, compassionate, had been invited to a Model UN conference at Georgetown University. Maya had been excited about the conference for weeks. She looked stunning as she left the house that evening, poised, elegant, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from being raised in a loving, supportive home. She insisted on taking the metro. "Mom, I'm 16. I can handle getting to Georgetown by myself," she'd laughed, kissing her mother's cheek as she headed out the door. The call came 2 hours later. Maya's voice was shaking as she spoke through tears. "Mommy, can you come get me?" Something happened. Andrea found her daughter sitting on a bench outside the university building, her new dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared from crying. The story she told would haunt Andrea for months. Maya had arrived at the conference and approached the registration desk to check in and receive her credentials. The coordinator, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair and a condescending smile, looked Maya up and down before speaking. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you're in the right place. The high school volunteer registration is around back." Confused, Maya explained that she was a delegate representing her high school in the conference. The coordinator's expression didn't change. "Miss, I'm going to need to see some identification and proof that you're actually invited to this event. We've had issues with people trying to sneak into conferences." Other students had started to stare as the coordinator made a show of examining Maya's student ID and checking the delegation list. The humiliation was complete when the coordinator finally, reluctantly allowed Maya to proceed to the conference, but not before loudly instructing her to please respect our conduct standards. Maya had stayed at the conference for 20 minutes before excusing herself and leaving. She couldn't focus on the proceedings knowing that the staff saw her as a threat rather than a participant. "Mommy," Maya said through tears as Andrea held her that night. "Why did they treat me like I was going to steal something? I was dressed better than half the kids there. I had an invitation. I did everything right." Andrea felt a rage she hadn't experienced since her own college days, but she controlled it. This wasn't about her anger. This was about her daughter's pain and dignity. "Baby girl," she said carefully. "Some people make assumptions based on how someone looks rather than who they are. It's not right, it's not fair, and it's not your fault." "But why does it still happen?" Maya asked. "I thought things were supposed to be different now." "You've been so successful. Dad's research is changing constitutional interpretation. We live in a nice house. I go to a good school. Why doesn't any of that matter?" That question kept Andrea awake for weeks. Why didn't it matter? She had built a nationally recognized law firm. She had won landmark cases. She had been featured in legal journals and invited to speak at prestigious conferences. But none of that protected her daughter from being humiliated by a conference coordinator who saw her skin color before seeing anything else. The next morning, Andrea made a decision that would change everything. If she couldn't protect Maya from every instance of discrimination, she could at least control some of the spaces where those interactions happened. It was time to expand Washington legal advocates into corporate representation. Within 6 months, Andrea had secured retainer agreements with 27 major corporations across the United States, including Richardson and Wilson's largest client, Westfield Industries. But representation wasn't enough. She needed to know what was really happening in these corporations when she wasn't around. That's when she conceived Operation Mirror, a comprehensive bias audit of her own client corporations conducted without their knowledge. The goal was simple: identify which companies had problems, document the scope of discriminatory behavior, and implement systematic solutions through legal leverage. The testing protocol was sophisticated. Andrea worked with a team of diversity consultants to develop scenarios that would reveal unconscious bias without putting anyone in danger. Professional actors were hired to pose as clients, applicants, and business partners in various situations. Hidden cameras documented interactions. Control groups ensured that any differences in treatment could be attributed to race, gender, or perceived socioeconomic status rather than other factors. The results were devastating. Of the first 22 corporations tested, 19 showed clear evidence of discriminatory treatment toward minority clients or job applicants. Black applicants were questioned about credentials 340% more often than white applicants with identical qualifications. They received interview callbacks 73% less frequently. They were approached by security 200% more often for suspicious behavior that went unnoticed when exhibited by white visitors. The data was undeniable, Carlos said later. Andrea came home after reviewing the first round of results and just sat at the kitchen table for hours. I'd never seen her so quietly furious. But data wasn't enough. Andrea needed concrete examples that would force people to confront the reality of what was happening. She needed to document discrimination so clearly and publicly that denial would be impossible. That's when she decided to conduct the 23rd test personally at Richardson Wilson Law Firm on the day of her most important client meeting. The stakes couldn't be higher. A $1.2 billion class action lawsuit against Westfield Industries that represented the culmination of 3 years of investigation and preparation. Because my daughter's dignity is worth more than any case, Andrea would later explain. And if I'm not willing to risk my own comfort to change these systems, how can I ask anyone else to do the same? The Richardson Wilson Law Firm stood like a monument to American legal tradition on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Built in 1878, it had hosted presidents, Supreme Court justices, and titans of industry for over a century. The building itself was a masterpiece of neoclassical architecture with soaring marble columns, hand-painted frescoes, and crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. But beneath the opulent surface, Richardson Wilson had a problem that management preferred not to acknowledge. In the past 18 months, complaints about discriminatory treatment had increased by 34%. Client reviews increasingly mentioned staff members who seemed to treat visitors differently based on race or perceived social status. The morning of the test, Andrea arrived at her office at 6 a.m. to make final preparations. The Westfield Industries class action team led by General Counsel Thomas Montgomery was flying in from Chicago specifically for this meeting. The lawsuit against Westfield Industries would create the largest corporate settlement for racial discrimination in workplace history. Thomas Montgomery was known in legal circles as a traditionalist who valued respect, hierarchy, and proper protocol above all else. The success of the case depended not just on the legal arguments, but on Montgomery's assessment of Andrea's character and professionalism. In corporate legal culture, personal integrity was often more important than dramatic courtroom performances. This isn't just a case. Andrea's lead investigator had warned her during preparation meetings. Montgomery is evaluating whether you're someone Westfield can trust to handle this discreetly and professionally. Any hint of instability or controversy could derail the entire negotiation. The irony wasn't lost on Andrea. Here she was preparing to potentially sabotage the biggest case of her career in order to test whether her client's legal representation would treat her with basic human dignity. At Richardson Wilson, Rebecca Martinez, the 24-year-old front desk clerk, was reviewing her visitor list for the day. Rebecca had been working at the law firm for 10 months and prided herself on being able to read people quickly. It's all about pattern recognition, Rebecca would tell her friends. You'll learn to spot the troublemakers before they cause problems. Rebecca had a psychology degree from a decent state university and plans to eventually move into human resources. She saw her current position as a stepping stone to bigger opportunities, and she was determined to impress her supervisors with her attention to detail and proactive problem-solving. What Rebecca didn't realize was that her pattern recognition was heavily influenced by unconscious bias. Her definition of troublemaker skewed heavily toward young men and women of color, even when their behavior was identical to white visitors who received warm, welcoming service. Linda Thompson, the office manager who supervised the front desk, had 18 years of experience in luxury legal practices. She had worked her way up from mailroom to management through sheer determination and what she called old-school client service. The key to prestigious legal practice, Linda would tell new employees, is knowing your clientele. You have to be able to tell immediately who belongs here and who doesn't. It's not about being discriminatory. It's about maintaining standards. Linda's standards were never explicitly defined, but employees quickly learned that visitors who looked wealthy, spoke with certain accents, or carried themselves with particular confidence received different treatment than those who didn't fit that profile. Security Chief Rodriguez had been hired 6 months earlier from a background in private security for luxury retailers. He brought a loss prevention mindset to law firm security that emphasized control and quick response to potential threats. My job is to protect the firm's reputation and assets, Rodriguez would say. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions quickly based on incomplete information. I'd rather be overly cautious than sorry." None of these employees considered themselves racist. They would have been genuinely offended at the suggestion. They saw themselves as professional, dedicated, and committed to providing excellent service. But their unconscious biases, reinforced by institutional practices and cultural assumptions, created an environment where discrimination flourished under the guise of maintaining standards. As Andrea prepared to enter Richardson and Wilson that afternoon, she knew exactly what she was walking into. She had studied the personnel files, reviewed the complaint patterns, and analyzed the incident reports. She knew which employees were most likely to exhibit biased behavior and which situations were most likely to trigger discriminatory responses. At 3:45 p.m., Andrea's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Montgomery. "Landing now. Looking forward to our meeting. This settlement will set a new standard for corporate accountability." Andrea smiled as she read the message. In 30 minutes, she would either be celebrating the successful completion of a historic legal settlement or dealing with the fallout from a very public confrontation about racial bias in her client's law firm. She straightened her tie, picked up her briefcase, and walked toward Richardson and Wilson's imposing front entrance. The doorman, recognizing expensive clothing and confident bearing, opened the door with a welcoming smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to Richardson and Wilson." Andrea nodded politely and stepped into the marble lobby, where her life and the legal profession were about to change forever. The Richardson and Wilson lobby buzzed with the quiet activity of a prestigious establishment in full swing. Well-dressed attorneys moved across the marble floors with purpose, their conversations mixing with the soft classical music that played from hidden speakers. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light that made everything seem to glow with prosperity and sophistication. Andrea approached the reception desk with the same calm confidence she brought to every legal interaction. Her Italian leather shoes clicked softly against the marble, and her Audemars Piguet watch caught the light as she adjusted her sleeve. To any objective observer, she looked exactly like what she was, a successful attorney visiting a prestigious law firm. Rebecca Martinez looked up from her computer screen as Andrea approached. Later, she would claim that, quote, "something about her immediately seemed off," though she would never be able to articulate exactly what that meant. In reality, her unconscious bias kicked in the moment she saw a black woman approaching her desk, regardless of her appearance or demeanor. "Good afternoon," Andrea said politely, setting her briefcase down beside her. "I have an appointment with Thomas Montgomery at 4:30. The name is Washington." Rebecca's fingers paused above her keyboard. She had been expecting this moment. Not specifically, but generally. In her 10 months at Richardson and Wilson, she had developed what she thought of as a sixth sense for people who didn't belong. And despite her expensive suit and confident bearing, something about this woman triggered every alarm in Rebecca's head. "Are you delivering documents?" Rebecca asked, not bothering to check her computer. Andrea raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry?" "I asked if you were delivering documents," Rebecca repeated, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "We have specific procedures for courier check-ins." "No," Andrea said calmly. "I'm an attorney. I have an appointment with Thomas Montgomery from Westfield Industries at 4:30. The name is Washington." Rebecca made a show of typing on her keyboard, though she wasn't actually accessing the appointment system. "I'm not seeing any Washington here. Are you sure you have the right firm?" At a nearby seating area, Mark Chin, an attorney waiting for his own meeting, looked up from his phone. Something about the interaction at the front desk struck him as odd. The receptionist seemed to be giving the well-dressed black woman a harder time than necessary. "I confirmed the appointment yesterday," Andrea continued patiently. "The meeting is regarding the Westfield Industries settlement. The conference room should be booked under Montgomery or Washington." Rebecca's typing became more theatrical. She wanted nearby attorneys to see how thoroughly she was checking, how diligent she was being in her verification process. "I'm still not finding anything. What did you say the name was again?" "Washington. Washington. Andrea Washington." Jessica Kim, the TikTok influencer sitting at the lobby cafe, noticed the commotion and discreetly started recording. With 89,000 followers, she had developed an instinct for content that would resonate with her audience, and this interaction looked like it might be going somewhere interesting. Rebecca continued her performance of searching the system. "I'm going to need to see some identification," she announced loudly enough for others to hear. And I'll need your bar card. Andrea's expression didn't change, but internally she noted the deviation from standard check-in procedures. Bar card? It's firm policy. Rebecca lied smoothly. We've had issues with certain people lately. Individuals misrepresenting themselves as attorneys. The phrase hung in the air like a dog whistle. Mark Chen stood up from his chair, his legal instincts telling him something was very wrong. Jessica Kim's finger hovered over the Go Live button on her phone. Andrea placed her driver's license and American Bar Association card on the marble counter. Here's my identification. As I mentioned, I'm here for a scheduled appointment with Thomas Montgomery regarding the Westfield Industries settlement. Rebecca examined the cards with exaggerated scrutiny, as if checking for forgeries. This address doesn't match our records, she said, though she hadn't actually checked any records. That's my office address, Andrea explained. The appointment was made through my firm, Washington Legal Advocates. What kind of firm? Andrea's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it. Thomas Montgomery, letting her know the Westfield team had landed and was heading to the firm. 15 minutes until the meeting that would determine the future of thousands of discrimination victims and set a precedent for corporate accountability. I'm sorry, Andrea said, but I really need to get to the conference room. I have an important meeting starting soon. Rebecca sensed hesitation and pressed her advantage. Ma'am, I understand you're in a hurry, but we have to follow our security protocols. I'm going to need you to provide further verification, and I'll need to call your office to confirm your identity. You want to call my office? It's standard procedure for visitors like you. The phrase hit the lobby like a small explosion. Mark Chen stepped forward, his phone already recording. Jessica Kim hit the Go Live button and watched as viewers immediately started joining her stream. Excuse me, Mark said, approaching the desk. I couldn't help but overhear. I've visited dozens of prestigious law firms, and I've never been asked for verification beyond basic ID. Is this really standard procedure? Rebecca turned to Mark with a completely different demeanor. Warmer, more respectful. Sir, this doesn't concern you. We're just following standard security protocols. Standard security protocols? Mark repeated. I checked in 20 minutes ago, and nobody asked me for additional verification or called my office. At that moment, Linda Thompson appeared beside Rebecca. The office manager had been watching the interaction from across the lobby and decided intervention was necessary. Is there a problem here? Linda asked, her tone immediately suggesting there was. This woman claims to have an appointment, Rebecca explained, but I'm having trouble verifying her information. Something doesn't add up. Linda studied Andrea with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 18 years in luxury legal settings. Her suit was expensive, yes, but anyone could rent designer clothes for a day. Her watch looked real, but replicas were getting better all the time. What bothered her most was Andrea's composure. She wasn't nervous enough, wasn't sufficiently deferential to their authority. Ma'am, Linda said, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we verify your appointment. Sometimes there are complications with certain types of visitors. What type of visitor would that be? Quote, Andrea asked quietly. Linda's smile was thin and cold. Pro se litigants can be tricky. We need to make sure everything is legitimate. Pro se litigants? Andrea repeated. I'm a licensed attorney with a scheduled appointment. Mark Chen stepped closer. I'm a licensed attorney too. Nobody questioned my legitimacy. Sir, Linda said, turning to Mark with visible irritation, I appreciate your concern, but this really doesn't involve you. We know how to handle these situations. These situations, Mark repeated. What exactly do you mean by these situations? The lobby was filling with observers now. Other attorneys had noticed the commotion and were gathering to watch. Some were recording on their phones. The energy in the room was shifting from curiosity to tension. Jessica Kim's live stream had reached 3,000 viewers. The comments section was exploding with reactions ranging from outrage to disbelief to support for the firm's position. The story was starting to write itself in real time. Andrea checked her watch again. 4:05 p.m., 10 minutes until the Westfield team arrived. 10 minutes until the most important meeting of her career. But she couldn't leave now. Not when the test was revealing exactly what she had suspected. Ma'am, Andrea said to Linda, I've been patient with your verification process, but I need to ask, is this how you treat all visitors with scheduled appointments, or just the black ones? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Linda's face flushed red, but before she could respond, Rebecca jumped in. Ma'am, this has nothing to do with race. We're just following our security protocols. Security protocols that apparently don't apply to white visitors, Mark Chen interjected. Sir, please don't make this about race, Linda said. We treat all our visitors equally. Jessica Kim adjusted her phone angle to capture the full scene. Her viewer count had jumped to 5,000, and local news outlets were starting to pick up the story from social media. Richardson Wilson racism was beginning to trend. Andrea opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside, Linda caught a glimpse of legal documents, what looked like contracts and transcripts from depositions. I don't need to see your legal papers, Linda said quickly, closing the folder. I need to see proof that you belong here. I belong here, Andrea said quietly. More than you know. And with those words, she was about to make the call that would change everything. But what happened next would shock everyone in that marble lobby. Security to the main lobby. Linda Thompson's voice crackled through the firm's communication system. Possible unauthorized visitor situation. The word unauthorized sent ripples through the gathered crowd. Phones emerged from pockets and purses like flowers blooming in spring. The scene was being documented from multiple angles, with Jessica Kim's TikTok livestream now serving as the primary feed for thousands of viewers around the world. Within 2 minutes, 3 security guards appeared in the lobby. Chief Security Officer Rodriguez led the way, his military bearing evident in every step. Behind him, Officers Wilson and Jackson moved with the practiced coordination of a team that had handled difficult situations before. Rodriguez had been briefed during his walk to the lobby. Disruptive individual at reception, Linda had told him over the radio. Claims to have an appointment, but documentation doesn't check out. She's becoming agitated and refusing to cooperate. As Rodriguez assessed the scene, he saw exactly what he expected. A well-dressed black woman arguing with firm staff, while a crowd gathered to watch. His training kicked in immediately. De-escalate, control, remove if necessary. What's the situation? Rodriguez asked Linda, positioning himself between Andrea and the reception desk. This woman claims to have an appointment, Linda explained. But we can't verify her identity or the meeting. She's becoming increasingly argumentative. Andrea hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't moved from her position at the counter, but Linda's framing of the situation was already shaping the narrative, and Rodriguez processed her words through the filter of his own biases. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, turning to Andrea, I'm going to need you to step away from the desk and come with me. Officer, Andrea replied calmly, I'm an attorney with a confirmed appointment. I have identification, my bar card, and a scheduled meeting with Thomas Montgomery of Westfield Industries. I'm not sure why that requires security intervention. Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward his handcuffs. In his experience, suspects who remained too calm during confrontations were often the most dangerous. They were either planning something or hiding something. Ma'am, please place your hands where I can see them and step away from the counter. The livestream audience had grown to 8,000 viewers. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them. This is insane. Call a lawyer now. She is a lawyer. Someone notify the Bar Association. Document everything. Mark Chen stepped forward again, his attorney instincts outweighing his personal caution. Officer, I've been watching this entire interaction. This woman has been completely cooperative. She's shown identification, provided her bar card, and maintained perfect composure. I'm not sure why security is necessary. Rodriguez turned to Mark with barely concealed irritation. Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please step back. It concerns everyone, Mark replied. This is 2024. We don't profile people anymore. Rebecca Martinez felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. What had started as routine threat assessment was becoming a public spectacle. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Look, Rebecca said to Mark, her voice dropping to what she thought was a conspiratorial whisper, but was actually loud enough for the microphones to pick up. I get it. White guilt is real. But enabling this kind of behavior doesn't help anyone. The comment hit Jessica Kim's live stream like a bomb. The viewer count spiked to 12,000. Screenshots of Rebecca's comments started spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Richardson Wilson racism began trending nationally. Andrea's phone buzzed. Text message from Thomas Montgomery. In lobby now. Where are you? Andrea looked around the marble lobby and spotted the Westfield delegation. 3 executives in dark suits, moving with the precision of people accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations. Thomas Montgomery himself, the 62-year-old general counsel who had flown from Chicago specifically for this meeting. The executives paused at the lobby entrance, taking in the scene before them. Security guards, crowd of onlookers, phones recording from every angle. And in the center of it all, the woman they had come to meet. Thomas Montgomery had built his career on reading situations quickly and accurately. The cultural context was immediately clear to him. A successful black female attorney being confronted by security in a prestigious law firm. The optics were terrible, but more importantly, the implications were profound. In corporate legal culture, how a person handled adversity revealed their true character. Montgomery had expected to meet Andrea Washington in a conference room to discuss settlement terms. Instead, he was witnessing her navigate what appeared to be racial discrimination with remarkable grace under pressure. "Washington," Montgomery said, approaching through the crowd. "Are you ready for our meeting?" The lobby fell completely silent. Even the live-stream comments paused as viewers processed what they had just witnessed. The Westfield executives knew Andrea personally. They had come to this law firm specifically to meet with her. The woman the firm was treating as a potential trespasser was clearly someone of significant importance. Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. Managing partner William Richardson's voice, urgent and concerned. "Rodriguez, what's your status in the lobby?" "Sir, we have a situation with a visitor who—" "Rodriguez," Richardson interrupted. "Please escort Ms. Washington to the executive conference room immediately." "And Rodriguez, be very, very careful." Rodriguez looked confused. "Sir, Ms. Washington is—" "Just escort her upstairs now." But it was too late for quiet resolution. Jessica Kim's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers. The story was spreading across social media platforms faster than the firm's crisis management team could respond. News outlets were starting to pick up the feed. Andrea looked around the lobby one final time. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings worth more than most people's annual salaries. She had chosen this moment, this place, this exact scenario for a reason. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrea said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby, "I think it's time you knew exactly who I am." She pulled out her phone and showed the screen to the crowd. The display showed her profile in the firm's client database. Andrea Washington, founder and lead counsel, Washington Legal Advocates, exclusive representative for Westfield Industries class action, priority client status. Quote, "My name is Andrea Washington," she continued. "I am the founder of Washington Legal Advocates, and I represent Westfield Industries in a $1.2 billion class action settlement. I also represent 42 other Fortune 500 companies in discrimination matters." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca Martinez felt the blood drain from her face. Linda Thompson gripped the reception counter to steady herself. Rodriguez's hand moved away from his handcuffs. "Which means," Andrea continued, "I'm the attorney who determines whether companies continue to use Richardson and Wilson for their legal representation. And I've been testing whether your firm would treat a black attorney with basic human dignity." The live stream exploded. 20,000 viewers became 30,000. Comments flooded in so fast they became a blur. Screenshots and clips started spreading across every social media platform. But Andrea wasn't finished. "And what you're about to learn will change everything you think you know about discrimination in America. What you've witnessed today," she said, "is exactly why I decided to test the firms that represent my clients. For the past 12 months, Washington Legal Advocates has been conducting bias audits across the legal profession. We hire actors, we document interactions, we measure service quality based on race, gender, and perceived economic status." She gestured toward the security cameras positioned throughout the lobby. "Today wasn't an accident. This was test number 23 of 47, and everything you've seen, every assumption, every discriminatory comment, every violation of basic human dignity has been recorded. The implications began to sink in. This wasn't just discrimination caught on camera. This was a systematic test conducted by a powerful attorney designed to expose bias in the legal profession. Thomas Montgomery stepped forward again. "Washington, I believe we have much to discuss." Andrea nodded. "Yes, we do. But first, I think some people have some very serious explaining to do." What happened next would determine whether this story became just another viral video or the beginning of a movement that would transform an entire profession. And the answer would shock everyone watching. The executive conference room on the 15th floor of Richardson and Wilson was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan, while the mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Today, it would serve as both courtroom and confessional. William Richardson paced behind his chair at the head of the table, his 30 years of legal experience offering no guidance for this unprecedented situation. His phone had been ringing non-stop for the past 10 minutes. Corporate clients, public relations specialists, legal counsel, and news outlets, all demanding answers he didn't have. Andrea Washington sat calmly at the opposite end of the table. Her briefcase opened, documents spread with methodical precision. The Westfield Industries delegation occupied one side of the table, their expressions unreadable, but their attention complete. On the other side sat Rebecca Martinez and Linda Thompson, looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. Rodriguez stood near the door, uncertain whether he was security or witness to what was about to unfold. The wall-mounted screen displayed a video conference connection to the American Bar Association's New York office, where Ethics Committee Chair Richard Blackstone was participating remotely. His usually confident demeanor had been replaced by visible concern. "Ms. Washington," Richardson began, "I want to apologize for what happened downstairs. This doesn't represent our values or our training standards." "William," Andrea interrupted quietly, "we'll discuss apologies later. Right now, we need to address the business implications of what you all witnessed today." Andrea clicked a remote, and the conference room's secondary screen came to life with a presentation titled Operation Mirror: Systematic Bias Testing Results. The first slide showed real-time social media metrics. Richardson Wilson racism, 47,000 mentions in the past 30 minutes. TikTok video views, 280,000 and climbing. Twitter impressions, 1.2 million. Instagram posts, 3,400. Stock price movement for publicly traded client companies, down 1.8% in 20 minutes. These numbers represent the immediate financial impact of what happened in your lobby, Andrea said, her voice steady and professional. But they're just the beginning. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of bias testing across legal firms over the past 12 months. Operation Mirror was conceived after my 16-year-old daughter was humiliated at a Model UN conference for the crime of being black in an academic setting. As a mother, I realized I had two choices: accept that this is simply how the world works, or use my resources to change it. The slide transitioned to show testing methodology, professional actors of different races and backgrounds, standardized scenarios, hidden cameras, and control groups to ensure statistical validity. We hired trained actors to pose as potential clients across 47 major law firms. Each actor followed identical scripts, made identical requests, and exhibited identical behavior. The only variable was their race, gender, or perceived socioeconomic status. Thomas Montgomery leaned forward, his corporate counsel instincts engaged. "What were your findings?" Andrea clicked to a slide showing statistical analysis. Black potential clients questioned about ability to pay legal fees, 340% more often than white clients. Meeting requests with senior partners, 73% lower than white clients with identical case values. Security calls involving visitors of color, 200% higher than white visitors. The data revealed systematic discrimination across 41 of the 47 firms tested. Not isolated incidents, not misunderstandings, but systematic measurable bias that was costing clients millions in missed opportunities and substandard representation. Rebecca Martinez had been crying silently since entering the conference room. She now spoke for the first time, her voice barely audible. "Ms. Washington, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who you were." Andrea turned to look at her directly. "Rebecca, you didn't know I was a successful attorney. You didn't know I represented major corporations. But you knew I was human. You knew I had identification and a scheduled appointment. You knew I was behaving politely and professionally. Why wasn't that enough? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Rebecca had no answer because there was no good answer. "Let me show you exactly what happened downstairs," Andrea said, clicking to video footage from the lobby's security cameras. The screens filled with multiple camera angles of the entire interaction, from Andrea's approach to the reception desk through the arrival of security. The footage was damning. It showed clearly that Andrea had remained calm and cooperative throughout, while firm staff had escalated the situation based solely on assumptions and bias. "Rebecca," Andrea said, pausing the video at a particular moment, "in this frame you can see me providing my driver's license and bar card." At this point, a simple computer search would have resolved any questions about my appointment. Instead, you chose to demand additional verification. Can you explain why? Rebecca's sobbing intensified. "I thought something seemed off." "What seemed off? My expensive suit? My professional demeanor? My polite tone? Or the color of my skin?" The questions were delivered without anger, but they cut deep. Rebecca couldn't answer because the honest answer would damn her completely. Andrea clicked to the next slide, showing Rebecca's employment file. "This isn't your first incident, Rebecca. You were written up in February for treating a Hispanic attorney rudely. You received additional bias training in April after inappropriate comments about Asian clients. Today wasn't an aberration. It was a pattern." She turned to Linda Thompson. "Linda, when you arrived at the reception desk, you had multiple options. You could have checked the appointment system. You could have called the conference room. You could have asked questions designed to resolve confusion rather than escalate confrontation. Instead, you immediately supported your subordinate's discriminatory behavior and called security. Why?" Linda's voice shook as she responded. "I was following protocol." "Whose protocol? Show me the written policy that requires additional verification for black attorneys but not white attorneys. Show me the training manual that instructs staff to call security when a visitor provides valid identification and confirmation of an appointment." Linda had no response because no such policies existed. The discrimination was based on unwritten rules, unconscious bias, and cultural assumptions that everyone understood but no one would acknowledge. Andrea clicked to a new slide showing the broader financial impact of bias across the legal profession. The Martinez lawsuit against your Atlanta office cost you $2.7 million in settlement and legal fees. The viral video incident at your Chicago location reduced client retention by 31% for 8 months. Today's incident will likely cost you $15 to $20 million in lost business over the next 12 months. Richardson's voice crackled through the air. "Andrea, what do you need from us? How do we fix this?" "William, this isn't about fixing a public relations problem. This is about fundamentally changing how we practice law. We have two choices. We can manage discrimination as a damage control issue, apologizing when we get caught, and hoping the news cycle moves on. Or we can eliminate discrimination as a business practice through systematic, measurable, accountable change." The next slide outlined a comprehensive transformation plan. AI-powered bias detection systems in real time, mandatory monthly bias training for all employees, anonymous visitor feedback systems with immediate response protocols, financial penalties for discriminatory behavior, including termination without severance, public quarterly reports on bias incidents and resolution, community oversight boards with real authority, partnership with technology companies to develop industry-leading anti-bias tools. The investment required is significant, Andrea continued. $8 million annually for technology implementation, training programs, and monitoring systems. But the cost of continuing your current practices is higher. She clicked to a slide showing projected financial impact. Law firms with diverse leadership and inclusive cultures outperform homogeneous organizations by 35% on average. Our bias audit showed that firms with the most inclusive practices also had the highest client satisfaction scores, the best retention rates, and the strongest financial performance. Thomas Montgomery spoke for the first time since entering the conference room. "Washington, this is exactly why Westfield Industries retained your firm. You understand that legal representation isn't just about technical expertise, it's about integrity and dignity. Andrea smiled for the first time during the presentation, which brings us to our original meeting purpose. She opened a new presentation labeled Westfield Industries Settlement, Building Systematic Inclusion. The settlement we came here to discuss isn't just about financial compensation for discrimination victims. It's about using Westfield's corporate influence to eliminate bias from the legal profession entirely. The technology was revolutionary. Facial recognition software that could detect discriminatory service patterns, audio analysis that identified biased language in real time, and predictive algorithms that could prevent discriminatory incidents before they occurred. We're not just talking about monitoring bias, Andrea explained. We're talking about predicting and preventing it. This AI can analyze microexpressions, tone of voice, body language, and service timing to identify discriminatory treatment as it happens. Every client interaction will be monitored and analyzed. Any deviation from our inclusion standards will trigger immediate intervention. The business implications were staggering. Law firms using the technology would be able to guarantee equal treatment for all clients, backed by data and verified by independent monitoring. Insurance companies would offer lower rates to firms with bias prevention systems. Clients would choose legal representation based on verified inclusion ratings. The market opportunity is enormous, Andrea continued. Once we perfect this technology in our client firms, we can license it to every law firm in America. The total addressable market is $400 billion annually. William Richardson found his voice for the first time since the crisis began. Ms. Washington, what about immediate consequences? What happens to the employees involved? Andrea's expression became serious again. William, that's an excellent question. Rebecca, you're terminated effective immediately. Your pattern of discriminatory behavior makes you unsuitable for client service. You'll receive no severance pay and no references. Rebecca's sobbing resumed, but Andrea continued without pause. Linda, you're suspended pending a complete investigation of your management practices. If the pattern of enabling discrimination continues in your record, your employment will be terminated within the week. She turned to Rodriguez. Chief Rodriguez, you followed the procedures as you understood them, but those procedures need to change. All security personnel will receive mandatory bias training within 15 days. We're also implementing a new policy. Security cannot be called on visitors unless there's evidence of actual threatening behavior, not just assumptions about who belongs where. Finally, she addressed Richardson directly. William, you're being placed on 3 months probation. During that time, you'll participate in intensive bias training and community service with the Urban Legal Alliance. Your compensation will be reduced by 50%, with the difference going to fund scholarships for minority law students. Whether you eventually return to managing partner status depends on your ability to demonstrate genuine change. The immediate consequences were swift and decisive. But Andrea wasn't finished. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened in the lobby today will be documented, analyzed, and used as a training tool for every legal professional in America. The video footage, the reaction patterns, the systematic failures, all of it will become part of our bias prevention curriculum. She clicked to a final slide showing implementation timeline. Westfield Washington partnership launches in 30 days. AI bias detection systems go live in 60 days. Public quarterly bias reports begin in 4 months. Full profession rollout within 18 months. The scope of the transformation was breathtaking. Andrea wasn't just changing one law firm. She was creating a new standard for an entire profession. Thomas Montgomery nodded slowly. This is exactly the kind of visionary leadership Westfield seeks in its legal representation. The settlement proceeds as planned, but we want to accelerate the bias prevention technology development. And we want to increase the financial commitment by 50%. Andrea smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. As the meeting transitioned from crisis management to strategic planning, one thing became clear. What had started as a discrimination incident in a law firm lobby was becoming a catalyst for systematic change across a $400 billion profession. But what happened next would determine whether this transformation would succeed or fail. And the answer would surprise everyone. The Richardson and Wilson Marble Lobby had been transformed into a media circus. News crews from CNN, ABC, NBC, and local stations crowded the entrance, their cameras and lights turning the elegant space into a television studio. Reporters pushed microphones toward anyone willing to speak, while social media influencers live-streamed their reactions to the unfolding story. Jessica Kim found herself at the center of the storm. Her TikTok live stream, which had captured the entire discrimination incident in real time, had been viewed over 500,000 times. Major news outlets were requesting permission to use her footage, and her follower count had jumped from 89,000 to 340,000 in just 2 hours. "I came here for a client meeting and ended up documenting what might be the most important legal story of the year," Jessica told a CNN reporter. "This isn't just about one law firm or one incident. This is about systematic discrimination that happens every day in prestigious establishments across America." The hashtag Richardson Wilson Racism had exploded across social media platforms. On Twitter, it was trending nationally alongside hashtag #BeAssaudit and hashtag Operation Mirror. Instagram posts showing screenshots from the live stream had accumulated millions of views. LinkedIn was flooded with legal professionals sharing their own experiences with discrimination in corporate settings. The comment sections revealed a deeply divided response. Finally, an attorney who puts her money where her mouth is. This is what real leadership looks like. Every law firm should do bias audits like this. About time someone called out systemic racism in legal practice. But there were also critics. This feels like a publicity stunt. Why risk a billion-dollar settlement for social media attention? Seems like reverse discrimination to me. What about the employees who lost their jobs? Andrea Washington stood behind the same reception desk where she had been humiliated just hours earlier. This time she wore a visitor badge reading, quote, "A Washington Lead Counsel." The irony wasn't lost on the hundreds of people gathered to hear her statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrea began, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded lobby. "Thank you for your attention. What happened here today represents both a problem and an opportunity." The crowd of reporters, attorneys, and onlookers fell silent. Camera flashes illuminated the marble columns, as dozens of news organizations documented every word. "At 4:12 p.m. today, I was denied proper access to a law firm where I represent their largest client because of my race. By 4:20 p.m., security was called to remove me from property where I had a legitimate appointment. By 4:45 p.m., we had begun implementing systematic changes." Andrea gestured toward the reception desk where Rebecca Martinez had worked just hours earlier. Rebecca Martinez is no longer employed by Richardson and Wilson. Her actions today violated firm policy, federal civil rights law, and basic human dignity. She will not receive severance pay or references. The reporters scribbled notes frantically as Andrea continued. "Linda Thompson has been suspended pending investigation. Her pattern of enabling discriminatory behavior makes her unsuitable for management responsibility. We expect her employment to be terminated within the week." She clicked a remote, and the lobby's large screens displayed a comprehensive policy document. Effective immediately, all Richardson and Wilson offices will implement the following changes. The screens showed a detailed reform package. Real-time bias monitoring. AI systems will analyze client interactions for discrimination indicators. Automatic alerts will trigger immediate management intervention. Staff displaying biased behavior will receive immediate corrective action. Client feedback revolution. Mobile app reporting system for discriminatory treatment. Anonymous hotline with 24-hour response guarantee. Public dashboard showing bias incident resolution rates. Employee accountability. Monthly bias training mandatory for all staff. Financial penalties for discrimination, including immediate termination. Performance reviews will include inclusion metrics. Transparency initiative. Quarterly public reports on bias incidents and resolution. Client satisfaction data broken down by demographic groups. Independent audits by civil rights organizations. Financial consequences. Any employee found guilty of discrimination will be terminated without severance. Partners who fail to address bias will face similar consequences. Firm management will be evaluated on inclusion performance. A CNN reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Washington, Critics might say this is performative. How do we know these changes will actually happen and aren't just a response to bad publicity? Andrea smiled. Because we're partnering with Westfield Industries to implement AI-powered bias detection across the entire firm. The technology launches in 60 days. The data will be public. There's nowhere to hide. She clicked to the next slide showing technical specifications and partnership details. This artificial intelligence can detect discriminatory language, measure service quality differences across demographic groups, and identify bias patterns in real time. Every client interaction will be monitored and analyzed. Any deviation from our inclusion standards will trigger immediate intervention. The financial implications were staggering. The technology investment alone would cost $8 million annually. The training programs added another $3 million. The monitoring and reporting systems required ongoing operational changes worth millions more. Some will say this is expensive, Andrea continued. But discrimination is more expensive. Today's incident has already cost Richardson and Wilson an estimated $4. $2 million in lost business based on our initial analysis. Their Atlanta lawsuit cost them $2. $7 million. The Chicago incident reduced revenue by $12. $4 million over 8 months. She looked directly at the cameras. Bias isn't just morally wrong. It's financially stupid. Mark Chen, the attorney who had defended Andrea during the original incident, stepped forward. Ms. Washington, I want to publicly apologize for not intervening more decisively earlier. I saw what was happening and didn't act quickly enough. Andrea nodded. Mark, your support today mattered more than you know. But you're right. We all have a responsibility to speak up when we see discrimination happening. The Westfield Industries delegation appeared beside Andrea. Thomas Montgomery stepped to the microphone with the measured authority of someone accustomed to billion-dollar announcements. Westfield Industries is proud to partner with Washington legal advocates, Montgomery said. Ms. Washington represents the future of American legal leadership. Professionals who understand that law should serve human dignity, not just corporate interests. The partnership announcement made immediate business news. Stock prices for Westfield Industries jumped. The bias prevention technology became a talking point for investors and analysts. Legal publications began speculating about competitive responses. But the most important reaction came from unexpected sources. A young black woman in the crowd stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Ms. Washington, I'm a third-year law student at Columbia. Last month, I interviewed at 5 major firms and was told at each one that I wasn't the right fit. Seeing what you did today gives me hope that things can actually change. An older white man raised his hand. I'm a retired judge. I presided over discrimination cases for 30 years, and I saw this kind of bias constantly. I'm ashamed to admit I often looked the other way because it was just too pervasive to address. What you're doing takes real courage. A Hispanic couple approached with their teenage daughter. Our family was treated badly at a law firm last year, the father said. Our daughter asked us why the attorney acted like we didn't belong there. We didn't have a good answer. Now we can tell her that some people are working to change things. These personal testimonials reminded everyone that the statistics and policy changes represented real human experiences of dignity and humiliation. Jessica Kim ended her extended live stream with a message that captured the moment. I came here for a meeting and witnessed history. This is what accountability looks like. This is what change looks like. This is what hope looks like. The crowd began to disperse as the evening news crews prepared their reports. The lobby returned to its normal, elegant calm. But something fundamental had shifted. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers looked the same, but the culture they represented was transforming. Andrea Washington remained at the reception desk for another hour, greeting visitors personally, ensuring everyone felt welcome, making sure that what happened today would ripple outward into systematic change. The test was complete. The results were documented. The transformation had begun. But what happened next would determine whether this moment became just another viral video or the beginning of a movement that would change America forever. 6 months after the Richardson and Wilson incident, the transformation of the American legal profession was both visible and measurable. The marble lobby where Andrea Washington had been confronted by security now featured discreet AI monitoring stations, and a diverse staff that had been recruited, trained, and evaluated using new inclusion standards. Maria Santos, the new head receptionist, greeted every visitor with genuine warmth that was both personal and professional. The AI monitoring system tracked her interactions in real time, but it rarely flagged issues anymore. The cultural change had been comprehensive and authentic. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," Maria said to a black attorney checking in for a corporate meeting. "I see you're with the Microsoft legal team. We have your conference room ready, and I've arranged for the document packages you requested." The interaction was smooth, professional, and respectful. Exactly what it should have been all along. But 6 months ago, Mr. Johnson might have faced the same discrimination that Andrea had experienced. The transformation hadn't been easy. Of the original 47 law firms in the Washington test program, 19 managing partners had been terminated for failing to implement inclusion standards. Over 300 frontline employees had been replaced. The legal profession had invested over $120 million in technology, training, and cultural change initiatives, but the results were undeniable. Client satisfaction scores increased 34% across all demographics. Online reviews improved from an average of 3, 4 to 4, 8 stars. Revenue grew 28% year-over-year despite the economic uncertainties. Employee retention improved by 41%. Legal settlements for discrimination dropped to 0. More importantly, the human impact was transformative. Andrea received thousands of messages from law students and clients sharing their experiences. "My family retained your recommended firm for our business litigation. For the first time in my life, I felt completely respected as a client." My teenage son said, "Dad, this is how lawyers should always treat people. Thank you for making that possible." I'm a black woman attorney who's faced discrimination at firms across the country. Your recommended firm in Denver treated me with such respect and professionalism. It reminded me that change is possible when people care enough to make it happen. As a Muslim client who wears hijab, I often feel judged in legal consultations. Your certified firm in Atlanta was so welcoming and accommodating. Small gestures matter more than you know. These stories represented the real victory. Not the business metrics or the media coverage, but the human dignity that had been restored and protected. The Westfield partnership had exceeded all expectations. The AI bias detection technology was now being licensed to law firms worldwide. The American Bar Association had implemented certification standards based on Andrea's metrics. Bar associations in all 50 states had adopted similar guidelines. "We've created a market for inclusion," Thomas Montgomery explained during a joint presentation at the National Legal Conference. "Firms that can demonstrably prove their commitment to equal treatment have a competitive advantage with both clients and recruitment." The financial markets had taken notice. Law firms with bias-free certification commanded higher billing rates and attracted more prestigious clients. Institutional investors were specifically seeking companies with strong legal representation from certified inclusive firms. And Andrea's systematic approach to bias elimination had become a model for corporate responsibility. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was happening in the Washington family itself. Maya Washington, now a senior in high school, had become a powerful voice for youth activism. The humiliation she had experienced at Georgetown had been transformed into purpose and advocacy. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles for her school newspaper, and had started a nonprofit organization called Dignity First that worked with businesses to eliminate discriminatory practices. "My mother showed me that you don't have to accept injustice," Maya said during a TEDx talk that had been viewed over 2 million times. "You can use your resources, your platform, and your voice to change systems that harm people. But change requires more than good intentions. It requires measurement, accountability, and sustained commitment." The 17-year-old had inherited her mother's strategic mind and her father's communication skills. College admissions officers from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford were actively recruiting her not just for her academic achievements, but for her demonstrated leadership in social justice. Carlos Rodriguez had also found his voice in new ways. His constitutional law expertise had expanded into civil rights consulting, helping companies implement bias prevention strategies across various industries. His immigrant experience and legal expertise made him a sought-after speaker and advisor. What Andrea did at Richardson and Wilson wasn't just about law firms. Carlos explained during a corporate leadership summit. It was about proving that businesses can be profitable and principled simultaneously. The false choice between doing well and doing good is exactly that. False. The Washington family had become inadvertent symbols of how personal experiences of discrimination could be transformed into systematic change. But they were careful not to let symbolism replace substance. "We're not heroes," Andrea said during a Harvard Law School case study discussion. "We are professionals who decided that human dignity was non-negotiable. The real heroes are the employees who embraced change, the clients who shared their stories, and the industry leaders who chose to follow rather than resist." The Harvard case study titled Operation Mirror, Using Bias Audits to Transform Professional Culture, had become required reading in law schools across the country. Students analyzed the decision-making process, the financial implications, and the change management strategies that had made the transformation successful. But the case study also raised uncomfortable questions that law students had to grapple with. How many other professions were unknowingly perpetuating discrimination? What responsibility did successful professionals have to address systematic inequality? Could bias audits and AI monitoring become tools of surveillance rather than liberation? These questions didn't have easy answers, which made them valuable teaching tools for the next generation of legal leaders. The transformation had also attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The United Nations had invited Andrea to speak about bias prevention technology at their annual Human Rights Conference. European law societies were implementing Washington Westfield technology ahead of new EU regulations requiring bias monitoring in legal services. The model was going global. What started as a mother trying to protect her daughter's dignity has become a movement, observed Dr. Jennifer Chen, a legal ethics professor at Yale. The question now is whether other professions will learn from the legal field or wait for their own Richardson and Wilson moments. The answer was already becoming clear. Medical associations were implementing bias audits in patient care practices. Educational institutions were analyzing admission and disciplinary patterns across demographic groups. Financial services were examining whether customer care varied based on race or socioeconomic status. The tools and methodologies that Andrea had developed for law firms were being adapted across professions because the underlying problem, unconscious bias affecting professional decisions, was universal. The legal landscape was also evolving. Class action lawsuits against companies for systematic discrimination became more effective as bias audit data provided concrete evidence of disparate treatment. But organizations with robust bias prevention programs found themselves largely protected from such litigation. The legal standard is shifting, explained civil rights attorney David Chen. Courts are beginning to expect organizations to have systematic bias prevention measures in place. Entities that can't demonstrate proactive efforts to address discrimination face significantly higher liability. Congress began considering federal legislation that would require bias audits for professional service firms above certain size thresholds. The proposed Professional Accountability for Bias Prevention Act would mandate regular discrimination testing and public reporting for firms with more than 50 professionals. The private sector has shown that systematic bias prevention is both possible and profitable, said Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the bill's sponsors. It's time to make these practices standard rather than exceptional. 10 years after Andrea Washington's fateful test at Richardson and Wilson Law Firm, the world had changed in ways that even the most optimistic advocates of bias prevention could hardly have imagined. What had begun as a mother's determination to protect her daughter's dignity had evolved into a global movement that fundamentally altered how institutions approached human equality. The technology that Westfield and Washington legal advocates had pioneered was now standard practice across professions and continents. The third generation of AI bias detection systems had achieved remarkable sophistication, capable of identifying and preventing discriminatory behavior with accuracy rates exceeding 98%. But perhaps more importantly, the need for the technology was diminishing. A generation of professionals had been trained in inclusive practices from the beginning of their careers. Unconscious bias hadn't been eliminated, but it had been so consistently identified and corrected that discriminatory behavior had become increasingly rare. Andrea Washington, now 55, had stepped back from day-to-day operations of Washington legal advocates to focus on the Washington Foundation, which provided bias prevention technology and training to organizations worldwide. The foundation had worked with over 50,000 institutions across 47 countries, creating a global network of inclusive practices. The goal was never to monitor people forever. Andrea explained during a TED Talk commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Richardson and Wilson incident. The goal was to create cultures where monitoring becomes unnecessary because inclusive behavior becomes automatic. Andrea Washington had graduated from Harvard Law with dual degrees in civil rights law and computer science. She now led the technical development team at the Washington Foundation, working on next-generation inclusion technology that could identify and prevent bias in emerging contexts like virtual reality environments and artificial intelligence systems. Each technological advance creates new opportunities for bias. Maya noted during a conference on AI ethics. Our job is to ensure that inclusion principles are built into new technologies from the beginning, rather than retrofitted after discrimination becomes apparent. Her work had attracted attention from technology companies, governments, and international organizations seeking to prevent bias in increasingly complex technological systems. The principles that had been developed for law firm lobbies were now being applied to social media algorithms, automated hiring systems, and even criminal justice software. Carlos Rodriguez had become a leading voice in international legal ethics, serving on corporate boards and advising governments on inclusion policy. His consulting firm had expanded globally, helping multinational organizations implement bias prevention programs across diverse cultural contexts. What we learned is that the desire for dignity and fair treatment is universal, Carlos reflected during a World Economic Forum panel. The specific expressions of bias vary by culture, but the human need for respect transcends all boundaries. The Richardson and Wilson Law Firm itself had become an unlikely symbol of transformation. The marble lobby where Andrea had been confronted by security was now home to a permanent exhibit documenting the history of the bias prevention movement. Law students, business leaders, and international visitors regularly toured the space to learn about systematic approaches to inclusion. Rebecca Martinez, the former receptionist whose discriminatory behavior had catalyzed the original crisis, had become one of the movement's most effective advocates. Her presentations about unconscious bias and personal transformation had been viewed over 10 million times online and had inspired thousands of people to examine their own assumptions and behaviors. "I represent the possibility of redemption and growth," Rebecca said during a presentation to law students. "If someone like me who caused real harm through unconscious bias can learn and change, then anyone can. But change requires more than good intentions. It requires systematic accountability and sustained effort." Her story had become a central part of bias prevention training programs, demonstrating that individuals could overcome prejudice when given appropriate tools and motivation. The broader impact of the movement was visible in statistics that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Employment discrimination complaints had decreased by 73% nationally. Client satisfaction scores showed no significant variation across racial or ethnic groups in any major profession. Public trust in institutions had increased as people experienced consistent fair treatment in their daily lives. Educational achievement gaps had narrowed dramatically as bias prevention programs eliminated discriminatory disciplinary practices and ensured equal treatment in classrooms. Healthcare disparities had largely disappeared as medical professionals were trained and monitored to provide consistent care regardless of patient demographics. The legal system had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Courts using bias detection technology reported that sentencing disparities had decreased by 84%, while public confidence in judicial fairness had reached historic highs. "We've made measurable progress toward equal justice under law," observed Chief Justice Roberts during a speech marking the 10th anniversary of bias prevention in federal courts. "Technology has helped us identify and correct prejudices that had persisted for generations without accountability." The international expansion of bias prevention had created new diplomatic and economic relationships. Countries with strong inclusion practices had become preferred partners for trade and investment. The Washington model of systematic bias prevention had been adopted by the United Nations as a framework for member nations seeking to address discrimination. Most importantly, millions of people were living and working in environments where they could expect to be treated with dignity regardless of their background or characteristics. The test that began in a law firm lobby had become a transformation that touched every aspect of human interaction with institutions. The legacy of that day at Richardson and Wilson would endure not in monuments or memorials, but in the daily experiences of people who could walk into any business, any institution, any space, and expect to be treated with the respect and dignity that all humans deserve. The test was complete. The transformation continued. The promise of equality was becoming reality, one interaction at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.